Well, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you everyone for joining tonight. I'm very excited to be with you to talk and to share my thinking as it relates to this time of such significant change in our organizations, but in our general lives as well. I have a framework that I'm going to share with you tonight. It's very focused on a sort of human-centric approach to change management and organizational wellness. And I'm very, very delighted to be with you. Before we go into the framework, though, let me give you a little bit of sort of general information. Who is this guy that's shown up on screen? Who am I? I'm a native Washingtonian, one of the few, the proud. I am a native. I was born in Georgetown University Hospital a while ago. I'm not going to tell you how long ago it was, but a while ago. But I have been living in New York City for the past 25 years or so. Just returned to DC relatively recently for a number of reasons, but I'm thrilled to be back. Thankfully, the cicada season wasn't too bad actually this year, which actually is probably a bad thing because the cicada season should be bad, but it wasn't too bad where I live. But really, really thrilled to be back home in the area and reconnecting with some old colleagues and some new networking groups. So I have about 25 years of executive roles in the brand and marketing space. I work for an Omnicom agency for about 15 years. I do run the New York City and the Washington, D.C. chapters of the Chief Operating Officer Business Forum. The DC chapter is a new chapter that we're about to launch in August. I've been running the New York City chapter for a long time, and much of my work is in the support of chief operating officers around the globe. But I'm also a certified personal trainer. And you may be asking, why is he showing me this? This has nothing to do with change management. It does, and you'll understand why that is in a moment. But more importantly, I'm a mix of left and right brain thinker. I have a couple big gaps on my resume. When I tried to go out and make it as a professional rock musician, I'm a very creative person. I didn't make it. I did have a song in the top 100 for a week. It is on iTunes, but that's not paying my rent. So I had to give that dream up. But I very much am a believer in the left and right brain working together to solve problems. Beyond that, I think it's more than just the left and right brain. I think it's the body, it's the mind, and it's the spirit. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. I am an adherent of airline instructions. I have not been on an airline in some time. But when I hear, put your own mask on first before you help others, that is how I live my life. We're going to talk about that today. You must take care of yourself before you can help anyone, as that relates to leadership, as that relates to change. And we'll talk a little bit about some tactics to starting to do some work on yourself. And finally, there's been talk for 15 months now on the next normal, the new normal. Look, I very much believe that we need to be focusing on a better normal. I think the magnitude of the change that we've gone through has been fundamental. And it's not just about returning to the way things were. It's about taking this pause, taking this once in a lifetime opportunity to say, there are some very significant challenges that we need to face and address and change if we're going to drive our culture and our society in a better direction. So we'll talk about normalcy and a better normal versus the new normal in a moment here. But as I said, I am a certified personal trainer, and part of what I do during these presentations is to bring in that world of my CPT experiences and my world of COO experiences. So we're going to do an exercise, but before we go into this, this is what I believe, and this is what I hope we can spend some time thinking about and talking about today, but also as we go back to our lives. In the midst of a still raging global pandemic, we're doing great in this country. We're not doing great on a global basis. We are in the midst still of a raging global pandemic. Massive shifts, obviously, in how we work and engage with one another. We've just been talking about that. Significant increasing acknowledgement of mental illness. And we'll talk about some statistics here in a second. And with a increasing imperative for businesses to engage in societal and cultural dialogue. My belief is that change and leadership will require three things. And those three things are thinking holistically, thinking intelligently, and prioritizing well-being. So in that context, I want to start us off with an exercise on well-being to get us into the right frame of mind. You didn't know you were going to have to do exercises today. It's a little treat just for you. So this exercise is going to be all about balance. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop my share. And if you are open to it, I'd love for you to come on camera so that I can see how you perform during this exercise if you're up for it. You don't have to, but I think it'll make this a much more visceral experience if you come on camera and participate in this exercise. So we've got a few brave souls, more and more coming on board. Okay, so this exercise is about balance. So what I'm going to do, think of me as your coach. Think of me as the CPT and the COO. I'm your coach for this exercise. And I'd like you to all stand up. And if you don't want to come on camera, that's fine. You can still do this in the privacy of your own home or wherever you are. We don't need to see you. Don't be embarrassed. But I'd like, for those who are willing to participate, I'd like you to all stand up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 2 instructions and 2 instructions only. Okay? And that first instruction is stand on one leg. And the second instruction is close your eyes. Oh, that's what I like to see. What am I seeing? I'm seeing lots of wobbling, lots of people starting to go from side to side. Okay, you can open your eyes and you can sit down now. Thank you for doing that with me. I'm going to go back to my screen now. And what am I trying to get us to think about as it relates to balance in this exercise? A point that, how do we make decisions and drive change without the appropriate inputs in the appropriate context? Because that is the world in which we now live. What just happened from a pure biomechanical perspective is that you have on your peripheral nervous system sensory neurons, and sensory neurons look at sight, smell, touch, feel. And when they gather that information, they send them up to your brain. Your brain then interprets that information, sends other neural signals back to your muscles to say, stretch, don't move, hold tight. So when you close your eyes, your brain does not know what to do with the lack of sensory information, isn't able to send those signals to your muscles, and that's why you lose your balance. So again, but the bigger question is, how do we make decisions and drive change without the appropriate inputs in the appropriate context? So what I'd love to do with you today is talk about 3 things: the challenge of health and personal and professional well-being. I'd like to share a very practical and a human-focused framework for driving organizational well-being. And we're going to keep doing some more exercises. So don't think that you're done. I'm going to bring you all back on camera soon. We're going to think about well-being, and we're going to think about and talk about emerging leadership responsibilities and change responsibilities within our organizations and society. Before we do that, though, let's go back in time to March 23rd, 2020. This is the first time I heard this phrase, next normal or new normal. And I'm going to just read this because I think it's just important to hear these words, right? It is increasingly clear our era will be defined by a fundamental schism, the period before COVID-19 and the new normal that will emerge in the post-viral era, the next normal. In this unprecedented new reality, we will witness a dramatic restructuring of the economic and social order in which business and society have traditionally operated. This is 1 week into the pandemic, if you can remember that far back, right? We shut down on March 16th, 2020. This is a week into the pandemic. Very prescient statement by McKinsey. And we're obviously starting to see dramatic shifts in the economic and social order. I would argue that we're nowhere again near the post-viral era. We're less than 50% vaccinated in this country, but you look at this on a global context. In India, it's less than 10%. In many countries in Africa, it's less than 1%. In many countries in Central and South America, it's less than 1%. This post-viral era is not coming anytime soon. So this new normal, this next normal, how are we all doing? Not really well based upon these 2 quotes, right? This past year has been filled with so much uncertainty and unfamiliarity. Nothing that we are doing today or have lived through in the last year is normal. I would concur with that statement. dealing with grief, dealing with the inability to connect with loved ones, being isolated, having to deal with kids being home, having to deal with uncertainty about our jobs is not normal. Adam Grant just came out with this quote a couple months ago: languishing, and this is his belief, languishing is a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It feels as if you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield, and it might be the dominant emotion of 2021. Languishing is the neglected middle child of mental health. It's the void between depression and flourishing. It's the absence of well-being. I don't know about you, but I do not want to live in a society where languishing is the dominant emotion of 2021. Hence the framework that I've put together, which very much focuses on moving towards a state of enthusiasm and emotional well-being. We'll get to that in a minute, but I think it's worth spending a couple minutes just talking about this idea of the absence of well-being and why so many of us are feeling that fire in our gut, that desire to kind of get back on the horse, is lacking a little bit. So there are a couple of reasons why I believe we have this absence of well-being. Just in general, the shift to remote work has made us more siloed. We're all together tonight. We're having this conversation, this collective discussion of something really, really important, and we're not together. We're not looking one another in the eye. We're not reading one another's body language. We're not having, as Toby said, we're not having pizza together. We're siloed. Microsoft just did a really interesting study where they looked at 30,000 teams across 31 different countries. And what they found was that within your individual units, your individual teams or individual collaborative groups, discussion and collaboration has increased pretty significantly. But any sort of broad scale collaboration or reaching out of your comfort zone or reaching out to other teams, those water cooler conversations, that has plummeted exponentially. And what they argue is that really inspirational collaboration is no longer taking place. This is a really, really sad and alarming statistic, but many of you, I'm sure, have been reading and talking about stress and burnout. This statistic is a pre-COVID statistic. This is a study that Gallup did before COVID that showed that 75% have experienced and are experiencing stress-related burnout. There are a number of reasons to why this is, and we'll start to talk about a few of them today. But one of them, I believe, is that we tend to measure productivity based upon number of hours worked. And most of us, at one point or another, have taken on a job or taken on a responsibility where we have to work more than 55 hours on a normal basis. This is a real problem, not only because of stress, but because what this does to your health. So the WHO, World Health Organization, recently came out with a pretty massive study that they've been doing over the last couple of years as it relates to what they call overworking. And how they define overworking is a job in which you are working consistently more than 55 hours a week. And what their studies showed was that those that work consistently more, those people that work consistently more than 55 hours a week increase their risk of heart disease by 17%, which is crazy, but more alarming, increase their risk of stroke by 35%. So the fact that we're experiencing stress and we're not doing very well from a physical standpoint is obviously something that we need to figure out as we think again about this new normal. CDC study, this just came out relatively recently. This is a study that they did as it relates to acknowledging symptoms of anxiety and depression in the workplace. This increased by 208% from December 2019 to December 2020. So this is obviously during the period of COVID. But it went from 11% of those surveyed to 46% of those surveyed. So almost 50% of those surveyed acknowledged feeling symptoms of anxiety and depression. This is increasingly going to become the most pivotal thing we need to think about as it relates to change. Because if we don't address this and acknowledge it and figure out why this is happening, potentially 50% of our workforce is going to be anxious or depressed, and we're not going to be able to drive successful businesses if that's the case. We talked about my focus on being a personal trainer as it relates to how I think about the business environment. Look, all of us are probably sitting way more than 8 hours a day, myself included. even though I keep telling myself to get one of those stand-up desks. I haven't gotten one yet. We are sitting down way too much, and that is dreadful for you. There's been a lot of research that shows that sitting more than 8 hours a day is actually worse for you than smoking cigarettes. And this is a massive, massive problem, not only for our health, but also for how we think about our economy. Again, so pre-COVID, 2019, we spent in our businesses $575 billion to treat sick workers. That is an alarming statistic. 66% of our population is overweight. A large portion of that population is obese. And that is fundamentally changing what is happening in our business environments. It's also about other things, right? So it's about data. It's about ransomware attacks. There's this absence of well-being. Just here near my neighborhood a couple weeks ago, it was difficult to fill up your car with gas because of the shutdown or the slowdown in the Colonial Pipeline. That was inconvenient, but I would argue that it's much more worrisome if you look at this broad scale. So it didn't make a lot of news, but in Ireland, there was a ransomware attack against the Irish healthcare system. And they shut the system down as they tried to determine whether or not they could restore their system from backup before paying the ransomware. And so what that meant was for 5 days, all doctor visits were canceled, all surgeries were canceled, all cancer treatments were canceled. That is a massive, massive, massive problem. And we're seeing, again, that these ransomware attacks are increasing. So as we think about data, we have to be very, very nervous about all of the environments that we're in and what this risk to data may do just in terms of our normal day-to-day. We have massive information overload, just too much information out there. A lot of it comes from social media. We're inundated by misinformation. And again, as we think about change, as we think about focus, as we think about making the smart decisions, misinformation is something that we're going to need to wrap our heads around if we think about well-being. We don't focus, and I'm gonna do a little exercise in a minute that relates to this lack of ability to focus. Our attention span continues to drop, and that's because, from my perspective, there's too much technology. Technology has been great. Technology has changed the way we interact with the world and with our colleagues. But what we do now is we jump from one thing to the next. We spend very little time thinking. We just spend a lot of time responding. And I think, again, as we think about our own well-being and our inability to focus, some studies have said that humans now have a shorter attention span than goldfish, and that our attention span now is 8 seconds. We're not going to be able to solve the problems and the challenges as it relates to any sort of new normal or best normal, better normal, and figure out how this relates to our own well-being until we start to focus more succinctly on things. This is alarming, and it should be alarming to all of us on this call. We have the world's greatest healthcare system by far. It's not even debatable. The healthcare system in this country is by far the world's greatest, and yet our life expectancy continues to go down. This is really, really scary. It's really problematic. There are a lot of reasons for this. Part of it's because we don't take care of our bodies. Part of it's because we're stressed. But we have to recognize that if we're trying to focus on a better normal, this is something that we need to turn around exponentially and very, very quickly. And I'm not going to go into this today, but let's not forget the elephant in the room is the bigger issue, the bigger crisis is climate change. We haven't been thinking about it as much over the last 15 months because we've been focused on COVID, but we will not have a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of positivity if we continue to suffer through massive changes in our climate. There's a pretty scary article in today's New York Times about how bad the drought is on the West Coast already. In some states, farmers are being told, just don't even bother planting this year because there won't be enough water. This is a big, big fundamental crisis that we have to, again, address much more full on as we think about well-being, both in terms of our physical well-being, but our global well-being. So I'm not going to go into this absence of well-being anymore, but obviously there's a lot that we need to be focusing on to start to turn the tide. So how do we start to do this within our organizations? I don't want to disparage the management consultants out there. But my argument and my belief is that we can't look to the traditional consulting route to solve these problems and to start to think about organizational well-being. McKinsey, resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, reform. Bain, reevaluate what we would create value. Realign the leadership team, redesign for the future. BCG, expect change and look ahead, understand broader social shifts. I love this next sentence. Scrutinize granular high-frequency data. Identify your own revealed weaknesses, study regions further ahead in the crises, scan for maverick activity, look at which new patterns reduce friction, maintain hope and a growth orientation. I don't know about you, but none of this resonates with me as it relates to how I think about bringing a broader and more myopic focus on well-being into my organization. This just seems like very oblique, vague, traditional business language. And I think after 15 months of dealing with a global pandemic, with millions of people dying, with this increasing inability to grieve, with a complete disconnect from the norms of what we had pre-COVID, a business-focused approach to organizational well-being is not what we need. So, exercise number 2, circuit training. And I'm going to stop my share here again. I'm going to ask if you'd like that you all come on screen. We're going to be doing another exercise. Again, you don't have to do this if you don't want, but this is a really fun one. I think you all, and not only is this really fun, but if you do this exercise with me today, you won't have to go to the gym tonight when we finish up the call. You will have gotten in your exercise for the day, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do circuit training. And for those of you who don't know what circuit training is, it's a very quick repeating of different sorts of exercises without a lot of rest. So I see Adam's doing some stretching. That's a good move because you're gonna need it soon. So we're gonna do 3 exercises, right? 3 exercises. And those 3 exercises are jumping jacks. Everybody remembers what jumping jacks are. Probably haven't done them in a while. If you have kids, you've probably done them. We're gonna do bicep curls, right? No weights, you don't need any weights, just this is all pretend, right? Bicep curls, and then 2-arm press, which is basically you're pressing the weight above your head, okay? So we're gonna do 3 exercises, and I guarantee you when you're done with this, you're gonna feel like you got your workout in for the day. So if you could stand up, I'm gonna call out what I'd like you to do, and we'll get through this exercise. All right, so everyone ready? Start with jumping jacks now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Bicep curls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2-arm press. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you're done. That's it. Workout's done for the day. You can all sit down. Everyone's feeling good. Everyone's feeling really refreshed, healthy. Got a good workout in today, right? Everyone's feeling good. I see some nodding heads. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my screen here. Give me a second. Of course you don't. It makes 0 sense to try to do exercises 8 seconds at a time. It makes 0 sense to think that you can jump from one thing to the next as you're thinking about training your body and actually get any sort of real benefit. I don't need to teach you that. Everyone knows that innately, that that's just not how exercise, that's just not how the body works. So as we, again, think about our organizations and the business world, how do we start to make really smart changes that consider the human condition? And what I mean by that is not just the condition, the physical condition of our body and how it works from a mechanical perspective, but also the human condition as it relates to the world in which we live right now. And so my argument is that the way we improve well-being is not by using business language, but it's using human language. It's talking about resilience and resistance. We've talked about this a lot over the last 15 months. We are going to have to build that muscle of resilience if we want to improve our overall well-being. Equally, we're going to have to recognize that we cannot be in this constant state of determination and drive and grit. Resistance is going to have to be incorporated in how we deal with this world. When you're able to say, I don't understand, but I'm not going down that path right now. I can't get all worked up about it. I need to put that aside and focus on something else. Empathy is another thing that I think has really helped to get us through this crisis. We've talked a lot about empathy. You've seen a lot of articles, I'm sure, about empathy. This is something that we need to hold on to. This is not something that then goes back into the drawer. We've gotten through COVID-19. We're no longer empathetic. We're no longer, recognizing the situation that everybody else in. We need to embody empathy, and especially us in the United States. Because as we start to think about coming back to normal, we need to realize again that the rest of the world is nowhere near where we are in terms of rolling out the vaccine. And the deaths everywhere else in the world they are going to increase and increase and increase. So this empathetic spirit, as it relates not only to our colleagues, but as it relates to how we show up and connect with the world, is something that I think we need to be very, very focused on. Mandate creativity. Our brain during a time of uncertainty tells us we got this thing called the amygdala in your brain that says, get me out of this state of uncertainty. I don't like this. I'm going to fight it, or I'm going to run away from it. I do not like uncertainty. We're going to have to get comfortable with uncertainty, and the response needs to be, don't run away from it. Figure out a creative solution to deal with it. Many of the challenges, many of the problems, many of just kind of figuring out what the next 2 years looks like in terms of how we work, in terms of how we collaborate, in terms of how we think about vaccines, in terms of how we think about, again, our role in the global society, is going to be based on a creative focus. So I would argue that one of the tactics for improving well-being is to mandate creativity in everything that we think about. Make choices. For those of you that can remember, in mid-1990s, if we wanted to have a conversation with someone or have a connection with someone, there were 3 ways and 3 ways only that we could do that. The first one was obviously picking up the telephone, a rotary phone, and dialing someone. The second way was writing a letter, putting a stamp on it, putting it into a mailbox. And the third way was meeting with someone face to face. Those were the 3 ways that we communicated and connected. Think about that now, and I'm just going to read some of these out. Email, text, phone, Slack, Zoom, Teams, Snapchat, TikTok, Google Hangouts, Clubhouse, Rocket Chat. I could just go on and on and on and on. All of these are tools that we now use to communicate. Almost all of them are one directional. That is, we put information out and we don't spend a lot of time receiving or thinking about information. Every year there is a new shining object. This year it's Clubhouse. A couple years ago it was Snapchat. A couple years before that it was Facebook. A couple years before that it was MySpace. Every year there's some new shiny object that we all feel like we need to incorporate into our organizations. And we're just at this point where there is just too much, and we're jumping from one thing to the next and not spending enough time focusing. Again, if you were to go into the gym, you would never choose to do 8 seconds of an exercise before jumping to the next one. And yet, oftentimes in the business world, that is exactly what we do. That's exactly what is sensed as normal. We're jumping as quickly as we can from one piece of technology to the next one and just communicating outwards and not inwards. So I argue that we need to make some very, very important and specific choices as it relates to our organizations. Courage. I don't believe confidence is what we should be thinking about as we think about well-being. I think it's courage. I think it's about a willingness to get in there and be part of the change, knowing that there will be some failure, knowing that the North Star is not out there. And despite that, we need to be courageous enough to say, I want to be part of this change. And that's not from a sense of confidence that you have the understanding of what's coming in terms of change, but you want to be part of the solution. You want to be part of the dialogue. And so really focusing on being courageous, putting on that growth mindset hat, saying, I will fail, I will still be afraid, but I'm going to do this regardless. And then finally, going back to a point I made earlier in the presentation, really thinking holistically. All the pieces do fit together. It's not just changing a focus on our mental well-being. If you just focus on mental well-being without thinking about physical well-being, you're not going to solve the problem. If you eat too many calories, there's a greater production of cortisol. That greater production of cortisol directly results in greater anxiety. That's just how we are genetically wired. So thinking holistically about our organizations, about our tools, about our people, about our space, not just focusing on, okay, the way to drive more innovative collaboration is we're going to bring in a new shiny object. No, how do all the puzzle pieces fit together? How does our physical well-being impact our mental well-being? How does our mental well-being impact our ability to be collaborative? How does that impact our ability to be honest and trustworthy? It's all connected. So my framework is based on social wellness, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, environmental wellness, occupational wellness, intellectual wellness, and physical wellness. I'm not going to scrutinize high frequency data. We don't need to, we've been doing that for the last 25 years. We've talked a lot about scrutinizing high frequency data. We don't need that right now. What we need is social wellness, emotional wellness. We need relationships. We need to figure out what relationships really mean as it relates to inspiration, communication, collaboration. What does getting together in person mean? Everyone's trying to figure this out right now. We need to focus on what social wellness means, not only for our businesses in terms of creating great work, but also in terms of, again, trust, honesty, transparency, inclusion, emotional wellness. We have spent so much time over the past 25 years talking about emotional intelligence. I cannot tell you how many books I've had to read as part of my executive experiences as it relates to emotional intelligence. I really believe that emotional literacy is much more important right now. We have just gone through 15 months without an ability to grieve. There's a lot of research going on right now, but that has impacted who we are in our core. And we have not spent enough time thinking about the power, the strength, what emotions mean as it relates to our ability to connect to one another. So I think, again, an increasing focus on understanding emotional literacy versus emotional intelligence is really part of creating a better sense of well-being. There are two things we don't talk about in business, and those two things are religion and politics. I'm not going to talk about that point today. That's not my argument. My argument is that there is a power, there is a collective consciousness, there is something within a focus on spirituality that connects to our values, that connects to feeling part of a global community, feeling empathy. What does empathy, what is that? You can't define it, you can't capture it, you can't put that in a bottle. It's a spiritual sensibility that we are all connected and that we all want to support one another. So I think talking about spirituality, again, not as it relates to religion, that can be one component, but that is not what I'm suggesting. Spirituality as it relates to a collective focus on helping one another, focus on creating a much greater impact from a global context, and really understanding how we can connect and inspire one another. Environmental wellness is obviously obvious. We need to be thinking very practically about what we do with our workspaces. Do we go back to the same workspaces? Do we downsize? But more importantly, how do we think about work? How do we think about this new phase of work, right? We've been doing work for a certain degree, to a certain degree, we've been doing work the same way since the Industrial Revolution. We've been leaving our homes, going into a place for around 8 hours a day, coming home, and then going to bed. That is not going to be the future of work. So as we think about well-being and as we think about wellness, how do we start to think about work in the context of our physical environment? Occupational wellness is all work-life balance. Work-life balance has been measured again by, I think, over the last productivity and work-life balance for many of us over the past 15 months is how many Zoom meetings are you able to get through in one day without wanting to kill yourself? Productivity has been measured by hours, not output. So again, as we think about well-being, as we think about the future, as we think about change, my argument is that we need to think about focus, productivity, being challenged versus hours. Intellectual wellness, again, these are all very sort of human, easily understood terms. What does it mean to be curious? What does it mean to develop your potential? What does it mean to be innovative, especially when you're afraid, when you're uncertain, when you're not sure what the future looks like, when you're not able to have drinks with your friends, when you're worried about your parents, when you're worried about your kids? How do you retain that sense of curiosity and focus? And finally, physical well-being. Again, there is a direct correlation between mind and body. We cannot be successful as teammates. We cannot be successful as organizations unless we take a much, much better care of our bodies. And that, again, if we focus much more myopically on physical wellness, is going to mean that we're not languishing. I think we all know, right? When we get to a place where we haven't really taken care of ourselves, or when we're sick and we're not able to exercise, or we're just in bed, you don't feel empowered. You don't feel enthusiastic. That's because your body has said, I'm not letting you feel that way right now. All of your energy is being focused on getting healthy. So again, I don't want to discount how important this is, and something that as organizations, we need to think about much more directly. And how do we provide more succinct and more direct help to all of our employees in relation to their physical wellness? So this is where the change management piece comes in, and I'm going as fast as I can. We'll hopefully get to discussion shortly. This is a 5-step process: define, assess, prepare, act, and maintain. This is the change framework approach that I have developed as it relates to those 7 pillars. This is also almost exactly what you would do if you were going to go into the gym and try to think of your physical fitness. You figure out what you wanted to do, you would assess your current state of well-being, you put a plan in place, you start to get physically fit, and then you try to maintain that. So very quickly, and then we're going to start to talk a little bit more about some of these tactics. Step 1 is defining wellness. And this, I think, is the most important portion of this change management tool. And this is something that I think we all need to start doing within our own organizations. What do we really mean by wellness? What do we mean by social wellness within our organization? What do we really mean by intellectual wellness within our organization? And then what are our professional obligations as it relates to our leadership responsibilities across all of our teams and all of our employees? But equally, what are our cultural and societal obligations as it relates to wellness? If we can really define what we mean by wellness, we can then start to act within our professional space, but in the broader cultural and societal context as well. And what are the new responsibilities of leadership as it relates to the wellness of our people and organizations? If 50% of our staff are acknowledging feeling anxious or depressed, does that not mandate that we have new responsibilities in relation to helping them through that? I would argue yes. I would also argue that most of us are probably not equipped to take on that responsibility. We're not trained psychiatrists. We're treading into ground that traditionally isn't the responsibility of our leadership. It's traditionally an EAP program, right? We say, oh, someone's not feeling so good, let me send them to the employee assistance program. That is not going to work any longer if 50% of our employees are feeling depressed or anxious. And then what do we need to change in ourselves to improve the well-being of others? So again, remember what you hear when you get on that airplane: put your own mask on first before helping others. How do we start with change within our own lives so that we become better leaders and therefore can help our teammates and our colleagues as well? That's the first step. I'm going to fly through these other steps because I know we're close on time to going into some of the breakout groups, so we can open up for discussion. But really, step 2 is like, how are we really? Like, as we think about, all coming back to the office, whenever that is, post July 4th, post Labor Day, whatever the new normal is that all of our organizations are trying to figure this out. Like, how are we doing? Are we ready to do this, really? I mean, are there things that we need to talk about, things that we need to express, things that we need to acknowledge? And what are the risks? Like, what are the risks to the organization if we don't acknowledge that there are some problems? Therefore, where do we need to prioritize? Where do we need to focus our energies? Where do we need outside help? Where can we look for resources? Where can we look for books? Where can we look for guidance? And again, what are our professional obligations as we start to think about the wellness state within our organizations? You don't go, again, into the gym and do 8 seconds of jumping jacks, 8 seconds of any exercise. You prepare, you think about it, you create a plan, you think about what your goals are for the day. I'm going on the treadmill, I'm going to lift weights, or I'm going to go do go to the pool, or whatever it is. You think about, you prepare, you think about the exercises, You start to think about what success looks like. You know, this last week, I was only able to do 20 minutes on the treadmill. I'm going to try to do 25 this week because I know if I can get 5 more minutes, I'm going to feel even better. And pace. Again, 8 seconds of exercise, one after the other, is ridiculous. And yet, we continue to try to engage with the world at the pace of technology. Technology increases in pace every year exponentially. We cannot do that. We are not genetically designed to go faster and faster and faster and faster. And we don't spend any time stopping to say, what is the pace at which I need to work in order to be productive, in order to be successful, in order to not be burnt out, in order to feel engaged. So establish, what does that pace mean? And then again, as we start to think about our preparation, let's define what our leadership responsibilities are. Act. What does engagement look like? We know that employee engagement is down. So how do we think about engagement? How do we think about getting involved in some of these activities? How do we start to measure productivity, right? If productivity is not going to be based on hours, it's going to be based on outcomes. How do we measure that? How do we keep everyone involved? There will be people that don't want to come along on this journey. Nobody likes change. Not even change management professionals, I bet you deep down really like change. So how do we keep everyone involved? And how do we inspire our organization? How do we bring them along on this journey to say, we are acting to drive an increased sense of well-being into our organization for you, for your colleagues, for the business, for our culture, for society? How do we think about inspiring like a coach does? How do I think about that coach that's on the sideline as you're doing those mile sprints or as you're doing those laps around the track saying, you got it, you can go for it? How do we provide that inspiration to our organization? And then how do we prevent relapse? How do we better anticipate challenges? How do we shake things up? Like, how do we introduce new activities or go from the inside to the outside? And how do we structure risk? How do we think about what might happen if we lose that focus on well-being and we start to go back to that fixed mindset where we're very uncertain and not willing to take changes? How do we think about risk in terms of whether there's going to be another new variant? And that throws everything back. We go to say what happened, we get through September, we're feeling pretty good. Come November, there's another new variant and we're all locked down again. How do we start to think about risk to trying to create a better normal and how we can anticipate it and provide different solutions to mitigate that risk? So what I'd like to do now, we've got 11 folks on the call, 10 folks on the call. We're losing people exponentially. Maybe do a 10-minute breakout group, maybe a couple groups of 3, a couple groups of 4, maybe a couple groups of 3. And I'd love for you to think about this again from that context of a coach. Appoint someone to be your coach. We want that coach. We want someone on your breakout group to come back and tell us about something that you've discussed that might inspire us or might make us think about something in a different way as relates to these 2 pivotal questions. What do we believe are our new leadership responsibilities as we drive change and well-being within our organizations? And where does change start? We're not going to solve anything in 10 minutes, but excuse me, hopefully coming out of a brief discussion, some interesting ideas will come up. And we'd love, again, as we go into these breakout groups, for you to appoint someone to be your coach to come back and enlighten us on the conversation. With that, I'm going to stop the share. And we're down to 9 now. Maybe we'll do this a little bit differently. Maybe what we'll do is, instead of breakout groups, I will just ask you to come off mute and answer those questions. If you have a perspective, where do we start? Where do we start with change? And how do you think about your leadership responsibilities in that regard?
I think change, when it comes to personal wellness like this, has to come from grassroots, right? It has to come from people in the organization, because there's an element of accountability there.
Can you expand on that a little bit? How does that relate to accountability?
Well, you can, it's not just something that you do while you're at work, right? It's
Right.
something you do while you're also outside of working hours. And it's something that can't be, it can't be mandated by your organization. It's something that can be recommended and can be, they can give you the tools to help you fulfill those goals or wellness goals of your own, but it's
Right.
not something that can be forced upon
Right.
as like a deliverable or
Right.
something at work that is directly related to your job duties and job performance. So there's definitely a way, some kind of line to toe there on getting people to actually be accountable to incorporating this into their lives.
Yep, I agree with that. Yep. Sheila, you were gonna say something?
Well, I'm listening to what Kara just said, and I'm thinking it's all well and good to say that it can start from the grassroots. It can, but in order to make any really significant change, you need to find at least one champion among senior management. It can't be, because you need to have someone who has the ear of the people who make decisions for the organization, if you're talking about organizational wellness. Now, I know you've given this kind of talk to several COO groups already, and I do think that's a good place to start, but I don't know that it necessarily has to be the COO. It just needs to be someone. It could be someone in HR if they are at that level. It could be someone in IT. It really doesn't matter, but you do need to have someone who has the ear of the executives and the board, that this is something that ultimately, if we want long-term viability and productivity, we need to take a broader perspective and not just focus on the immediate return on some existing product, but what is the creativeness, inventiveness, resilience of the organization going to be? And a lot of that depends on the mental and physical well-being of the people.
Yep.
And I know they've done studies where they say if you're working too many hours, you think you're making good decisions and you're being creative, and you're not. And I've experienced that personally a couple of times where I thought I was doing great and I was working way too many hours and I was being really stupid in some of my decisions. I just didn't realize it until I got some sleep.
Yep.
But I do think that you can, you need to make a change in the whole organization, change people's mindset. And that's not a one-shot thing. That's something that's a campaign over time. And I don't know whether it works better to do it incrementally, to try to make small changes, or to come out with a philosophical change where you have maybe a statement of the corporate perspective that everybody buys into, and then you try to break it down into smaller pieces, and maybe you make some committees. Some of it is just things like instead of just paying lip service to groups that do things like represent different parts of the like different cultural perspectives, instead of it just being lip service, where there's an active engagement, and where it's not just something that happens off in a room somewhere in some building, if you're interested, but something where they do it, make it available on company time. Like one thing I heard about that one company is doing now is on Friday, they have an online Zoom meditation to prepare for the weekend. That's during business hours, that anyone who wants to can join. That would be an example of trying to get to that balance and saying it's okay to not work 7 days a week. It's okay to not work 80 hours a week.
So my argument to that would be that those meditation rooms and those meditation spaces have been in place for some time, but I don't think that there has been a direct alignment with the importance of senior management expressing that these are important parts of the offering of the organization and important parts of actually being a participant in the culture of the organization is by taking advantage of these things, not just because they're there, but because they actually provide tangible value to this long-term success of the organization.
Well, you talked about a room for meditation. I talked about an organized meditation meeting that was publicized regularly and communicated throughout the organization. And I do think, again, you need to get participation of some managers and executives to say that it's okay. I remember years ago, I was working in an organization that went from very formal business attire to casual Fridays. And I was talking to someone, I can't remember whether she was a director or a VP at that time. And she's like, but nobody's going casual. And I said, look, if you want anybody to go casual, you got to go in casual because they're all going to follow your lead. And it's the same with these kinds of things. It can't be just lip service. Yeah, you can do it. It has to be put your money where your mouth is. And you guys have to do it too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So Adam, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, no, Sheila actually touched on it there towards the end, which was, to me, this is like self-managing teams, right? Like, hey, I want to empower you. I give you all this power. And people are like, I don't know what to do with this yet. So I think that there are organizations, even who are trying to think ahead of this or be present with it, maybe is the more appropriate statement. They can be offering these kind of things and they can be believing in them, but whether people are saying, hey, I'm burnt out, or hey, like really being comfortable with expressing that so that they can get support that might be offered. That's a whole other hurdle. And I think that's the fun part about change management is, change is just so gosh darn easy if it weren't for people.
Great. Yeah, good point. Malik, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I was just going to tie in some of the elements of like the last two responses, like when she mentioned the meditation and he talked about what sounded like creating safe spaces for people to express like some of the different things that they're dealing with in their personal life. I think just to go back to what you said about all the additional stressors that have come into play for people as a result of the pandemic, that it would be important for us to, as leaders in organizations, to put an emphasis on restructuring company culture to make sure that we're accommodating for those additional elements of stress.
Yep. I think Karen also has a comment or a question.
I think it's leadership saying it's okay, that it needs to be taken further than that. That leadership needs to address, all the stress that we are all under, and really speak to the kind of unparalleled experience we've all had this past year, because I think that a lot of people may not even realize what they're experiencing. About a month ago, I congratulated myself because I said, you know what, I've just done fine through all this. It really hasn't touched me at all. I'm good. And then I realized I'm not. and I kind of had a downturn, and I've bounced back, but I think it really needs to be spoken about openly, and that collectively, this is something that we're doing collectively as an organization or division or team, and I think that's an important stance, a position to take. So people don't think that, oh, what are people going to think of me if I say, I'm kind of feeling down or anxious about this. It's normal, and I think it needs to be normalized, and so that everybody can feel comfortable in joining into the wellness journey, return to wellness.
Yeah. What I find interesting, right, if you look back at culture and society, and you look back again, the Industrial Revolution, where most people moved from the countryside to the cities to take on roles in these big factories. That worked for a little while, but coming kind of directly out of that experience was the beginning of the arts and crafts movement, where many people said, this is crazy. Why have I left the comfort of, being able to wear multiple hats and have a little farm and not deal with this pollution and this stress? Are we at that kind of moment now, right? Is this post-pandemic period going to see many people say, like, the traditional workplace is not a place where I'm going to be healthy, is not a place where I'm going to be well? Again, we were talking earlier about this argument that came out in Fast Company that says we're about, it's the age of resignation. Are we going to see people just saying, my company's not going to take care of me? They're just focused on bottom line. They're just focused on profit. As soon as I walk out the door, they're just going to grab somebody else off the street to fill that spot. So let me look for better pastures.
Yeah, people don't want, they're tired of grinding it out. They want, a home that, a place where they feel camaraderie, support. Like you said, somebody's coaching them, somebody's there for them and supportive of them. And, the last project I was on, it was kind of grinding it out. The last time I spoke to someone, she said people were staying up all night. It's like, that's not good.
No.
That is not good.
No. Sheila, you have another comment? Or?
Yeah. I was thinking about what we were talking about earlier with CFOs wanting to see people and everything's organized along the, how many hours a day people are working and how many are billable hours. And so I think also and I think a lot of people in a command and control type organizational structure want to be able to see people are working. And that's a mindset that has to change if you're going to allow people flexibility, because even in organizations that theoretically have flexible work hours, I know I've worked in organizations where if the senior management came in at 7 or 8 in the morning, if you came in later, they thought the time that they didn't see you working didn't count. And if you were working remote, it didn't count. And we have to find a way to change that. I'm not sure what that way is, but I think unless that changes, and again, it's like you were talking about outcomes, that it shouldn't be hours physically in a chair, which isn't healthy anyway. It should be, what are the outcomes that result and how effective are you? And we need to find better ways to identify what's really valuable and reward it. Because that's another concern. People aren't going to be willing, even if it's at the expense of their mental health, they're not necessarily going to be willing to make changes if they think it's going to adversely affect their future.
Agree with that. So we've got two raised hands. We've got Joy Crook, which I'm assuming is not your Joy. Is this Joy?
Yes, that's actually my name, first and last. I was thinking similar things. I was thinking, I think at a top level leadership, you need to, if this is actually something that you want to move toward, like some kind of symbolic, like, I don't know how you all do it in your companies, but we have like a red, yellow, green status, you can see where people are. And, early on bosses said, like, we're not tracking, but like, let's be honest, if you see someone's gone for like a couple hours, like you're just going to wonder. Yeah. And I'm sure it's happening, from a leadership level down to an employee. So like something along those lines of like, we're going to remove the red, yellow, green option, or something that actually showed people that they trusted them, because this conversation and your words were just so resonant. I was sharing a very similar presentation from Gartner last week. And my boss, who's a director, was just truly shocked that this was the state of things. And she was like, wow, we need to share this with like more leaders. And I was like, wow, like this isn't like kind of obvious that people are struggling on the whole. But I do think it's like, I think it's a blind spot. And I think it would take a very massive shift at a symbolic level to show people that they're actually serious about it. And I think it's like the expectation that it could become a leadership management competency to facilitate. I'm thinking like to have a couple different options, like to your point of empowering people, you know, to say like, okay, everyone like do something, you know, but to actually give people some concrete things that they can choose from and then make them choose and be accountable to choose. And so I feel like it would take some symbolic leadership and then the day-to-day and then some accountability to actions from my perspective.
Yep, all good points. Yep. Adam, you have another comment? Oops, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, just real quick, as a little add-on to what Joy just mentioned, I have a friend who works for another company, and they're so married to that like red, yellow, green thing on Teams that she has ended up purchasing a mouse jiggler for when she is like takes an hour to go to the gym during the workday or something like that. She'll put it on so that, because she, you know, she has her phone with her. And I was just thinking when she was telling me about this, I was like, this is just wrong. This is just wrong. You shouldn't need that, and she shouldn't feel this, you know, pressure to have to even utilize something like that.
Well, there are many companies out there, right, that their plan is to install surveillance software on their employees' computers so that they can track how much time they're working and how much time they're away from the computer. And that's what they believe is what they need to do to drive productivity. It's insane. I mean, it is insane. So I know we've only got about 4 more minutes, and I do want to do one final exercise. So maybe we'll 2 more quick comments, and then we'll do the final exercise.
I'll knock mine out quick. Is just right. But moving to an outcome-based culture is hard. We knew that before the pandemic, and so I just think, like everything else I was saying earlier, you know, consistent with change management practices, it's not going to work the first time. It's like any transformation, right? You're going to have to experiment. And what works for Chris might not work for Sheila, and might not work for Joy, right? Like all of our contexts are independent, and so it's going to be a couple of years of experimentation before this actually settles itself out.
Agreed. Women are going to drive that change, because women still want the same opportunities that men have. Women have disproportionately left the workplace during the last 15 months. And women are responsible for most of the childcare from a statistical perspective. And I think women are going to demand that they are compensated and considered, not in relation to how many hours they are physically in an office, but in terms of what they deliver to the successful project, right? Whether that's insight or design or creativity or whatever it is. That's my belief. Again, if you look at the statistics as it relates to the percentage of women that are at least indicating that they're just not going back to the office, but that they still want the same opportunities that men have. So you just can't base it on who's in the office versus who's not, or this person works 46 hours this week and I only was able to work 37 hours. So what difference does it make whether you've worked 37 hours or 46 hours? So, but I agree with you. It's not going to happen overnight. And Sheila, one final comment, and then we'll do the final quick exercise.
Sure. Okay, you mentioned something about surveillance software, and I would argue that for knowledge workers, that is so it's not even just not a great thing because it's invasive. It's counterproductive if that's how you're going to measure productivity. Because for most knowledge workers, sitting at a desk and thinking, you're not doing keystrokes. But the real value you're adding a lot of times is either in the thought process, or I worked in one organization where a manager came in and said, where is this person? The person they were asking about was an analyst whose task was to build relationships with business stakeholders in several other departments. And I said, she's probably out building relationships because that's her job.
Right.
Her job is not to sit here at a desk. Her job is to, gather information, and her job is to build relationships and build a level of trust. And you can't do that while you're sitting there trying to input a certain number of keystrokes per minute. That's just not part of the job. And that's true for most knowledge workers.
So Miranda, I don't know how much of a hard stop do you do? Do we want to just end with that, or do you want to?
You're totally fine to go a little bit over.
Okay, so I want to do one more exercise again, and just to sort of reinforce some of the points that I was trying to make. And my sort of underlying perspective as it relates to this sort of change that's coming and our responsibility as change management professionals is that it will be essential for the leaders to provide lots of context, lots of direction, lots of support, lots of information, lots of hand-holding, lots of coaching, to a much greater degree, I think, than was the case pre-COVID. So I'd like us to do the exact same thing we did before, which is to try to balance on one leg while closing your eyes. But this time, what I did before was I said, I'm going to give you 2 commands. I said, stand up and stand on one foot and close your eyes. So let's do it very differently this time. So I'm going to do this with you before I sat down and told you what to do. I want to do it with you. And what I'd like us to do is think about what I'm asking you to do, right? What I'm asking you to do is the context of the exercise is to try to balance on one leg while closing your eyes. And as I explained previously, right, the way your brain works is that if it doesn't have that sensory input, it doesn't know the signals to send. But you can also train your brain, and you don't need to start with the sensory input. So you can say, okay, we're going to do this exercise, brain. Okay, brain, I'm telling you, we're going to do this exercise where we're going to try to balance, stand on one foot and close your eyes. So the context of this, right, is how do you balance? You get your center of gravity focused. So, you find that center of gravity. You can bend your legs, right? You can hold on to something. I didn't say before, like, don't hold on to something. Nobody held on to something, right? Because I didn't provide that information. You can hold on to something. You don't have to if you don't want. You can bend, you can put your arms out. That's another great way to get balance, right? More information. I'm giving you more information. And then we can say, okay, let's get very comfortable. Hold on to something, or get your arms out, or get to that place where that balance is already there. The balance is there. You're comfortable with that balance. Now you can stand on one leg. I didn't tell you how high to lift it. I didn't tell you at an angle. Lift that leg just slightly off the ground, like right next to the other leg. That's going to keep your center of gravity perfect. And now try closing your eyes. And I would hope that you're much, much more balanced. So again, that's the end of my spiel. I think, again, the opportunity is for us to direct, to help drive this, but we will be tasked with playing lots of different roles. I think to a certain degree, those that are leaders and have to drive some of this change are going to have to a certain degree, become therapists, and really acknowledge that part of the way we become better leaders and create the next generation of leaders is to really kind of acknowledge what's happening with the world. So thank you for giving me this opportunity and platform. I've really enjoyed spending time with all of you. I'm happy to stay on if there's a couple more questions, but I'll provide my email is chris@nyc.com. If you want to reach out with any questions, I'd be happy to address them. And again, I will be giving Miranda the presentation if you'd like to go through it.
Thank you so much, Chris. This is a great presentation. I feel like it was just so timely and something that we just haven't really seen before. So yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I will stop the recording now.
Thank you so much, Chris. This was wonderful.